Number 1 in the name of Paul Goldsmith. Paul Goldsmith.
Mr. Speaker, the question to the Minister of Finance. What recent reports has he received on the New Zealand economy?
Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Finance, the Reserve Bank this morning issued its latest monetary policy statement. It confirmed that GDP growth has strengthened over the last 18 months and become increasingly broad-based. In addition to low interest rates, the Bank Governor noted growth had been supported by higher construction activity, elevated terms of trade and high levels of immigration. These conditions have contributed to very strong consumer confidence and increases in business investment and hiring intentions. The Reserve Bank is also forecasting strong growth in jobs over the next 4 years, with seasonally adjusted employment growth of 3.5%, 2.1% and 0.9% respectively over the next 3 years. It was within this context of a faster-growing economy that the Governor confirmed the official cash rate will rise by 0.25%, taking it from a record low of 2.5% to 2.75%.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Paul Goldsmith.
To the Minister, how does the new 2.75% official cash rate compare with previous cash rate settings, and what steps are the government taking to ensure interest rate increases are not as severe as they were in the mid-2000s?
Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Finance, as I said, the official cash rate has been at a record low of 2.5% since March 2011. As the Reserve Bank Governor has indicated many times, it could not remain at this expansionary level forever, particularly as the economy picks up strong momentum. The new OCR rate of 2.75% is significantly below its record high of 8.25%, which was through much of 2008. The government continues to support lower interest rates with its responsible fiscal policy and by addressing supply issues in the housing market. This has been good news for families who have faced mortgage interest rates of nearly 11% back in 2008. A family with a $200,000 floating rate mortgage has been saving about $200 a week compared to 5 or 6 years ago. If the OCR increases by 1% over the coming year, this would be worth around $38 a week on that mortgage.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Paul Goldsmith.
To the Minister, what else did the Reserve Bank say about the economy in its latest monetary policy statement?
Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Finance, the Reserve Bank forecasts the economy will grow at an annual pace of around 3.5% on average over the next year. It's a little higher than it forecast previously and would put New Zealand amongst the fastest growing developed economies in the world. Nationwide construction spending is expected to rise to levels similar to the mid-2000s construction boom and last for several years, although housing market momentum appears to have moderated. Strong net immigration is expected to boost private consumption, and the terms of trade are expected to remain elevated. This is all good news. The Reserve Bank expects a stronger economic outlook to support more jobs and lower unemployment. It expects the unemployment rate to drop below 5% next year.
Supplementary question, Dr Russell Norman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Was Kim Campbell, the head of the Employers and Manufacturers Association, correct when he said this morning that these avoidable interest rate rises will lead to, I quote, mass closures of businesses?
Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Finance, with respect to Mr. Campbell, no. I think that's a particularly dramatic and alarmist thing we're used to hearing from the opposition.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Dr Russell Norman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With regard to the Minister's comments about controlling inflation in the housing market, isn't it the case that Auckland house prices have increased by 44% over the 5 years of this government? And does he believe that an increase of 44% in the Auckland housing market over the course of his government is a sign of a successful policy to control house price inflation?
Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Well, Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Finance, I'm advised by the Minister of Housing that in fact the figure for Auckland is around 26%, and interestingly contrasts with the period of the previous government where it nearly doubled Auckland house prices over that period. But the key point for the member is how you address that, and the way you address that is increasing the supply of housing, something which this government, yes, it's working well if you look at things, measures such as the building consents and so on, that is improving. And what you don't do is restrict the supply of housing artificially because you have an ideological aversion to greenfields housing.
Supplementary question, Dr. Russell Norman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Isn't it the case that families will be paying more for their mortgages as a result of this government's failure to control inflation coming out of the housing sector, and also as a result of the government's failure to control inflation coming out of the electricity sector, as people all around the country are receiving these letters from their electricity providers telling them that prices are increasing dramatically in the year ahead, for some people as much as 24% under the current settings of this government?
Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Finance, no, I don't agree with the member. And the simple reality is, if you look at the CPI projections, in fact, of the Reserve Bank today, the 2013 year was 0.9%. 2014 is expected to be 1.7%, 2015 1.9%, and 2016 2.1%. These are a long, long way from the high levels of inflation we saw under the previous government, and the primary way in which you control that is to have responsible fiscal policies. Yes, individual markets are important, but if a member thinks that dealing with the housing market by not increasing supply and dealing with the electricity market by turning it into a monopoly purchaser would have any positive impact, he's wrong.
Supplementary question, Paul Goldsmith.
To the Minister, what reports has he seen on alternative approaches to economic and monetary policy, and how would this impact on interest rates for New Zealand households?
Honourable Stephen Joyce, in as far as he has ministerial responsibility.
Well, Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Finance, I have seen an alternative policy reported, claiming that apparently you can go soft on inflation by tinkering with the Reserve Bank Act, and somehow this will keep interest rates lower for longer. The trouble is with those sorts of approaches is that the prescription does not stand up to scrutiny, particularly if you accompanied it with a lot higher government spending. History has shown that governments that go soft on inflation, the people that are hardest hit are those on low and fixed incomes, because their spending power doesn't keep up with the cost of living. Yet the very politicians that complain about the cost of living can now approach apparently a policy that would set them soft on inflation. See, that just doesn't make any policy sense. If you want to look after the vulnerable in society, control inflation.
Question number 2, Honourable David Parker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to